We're going to continue the agriculture kind of theme here a little bit and focus on soil health and other practices that local producers are using to adapt to new circumstances and some of the challenges that they face. So Madeline Wilson is our moderator for this panel. She's an agricultural production systems specialist at the CSU Extension Office in Monte Vista, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself. John Rizza, here on the end, achieved a Bachelor of Science degree in Natural Resource Management with a minor in forestry from Colorado State University. He holds a Master of Science degree in forestry from the University of Tennessee. John has extensive experience helping private landowners manage their resources and has a background working with Colorado State Forest, CSU Extension, USDA, NRCS, Oregon State University Extension, and now the Colorado Department of Agriculture as the Western Slope Soil Health Coordinator. John contributes to advancing the implementation of practices that sustain healthy soils through these endeavors. Michael Jones was born and raised in the San Luis Valley. He attended Seattle Pacific University and graduated in biochemistry. He spent the majority of his career working in biotech in Boston, Seattle, and Boulder. In 2017, he moved back to the farm with his wife, Sarah, and now 3 daughters, to be the 4th-generation farmer for family-owned Jones Farms Organics, and a number of them are sitting here in the crowd with us, so happy to have them here. This farm is the first regenerative organic certified farm in the state of Colorado, on which the Jones family grows 20 varieties of potatoes, heirloom, wheat, rye, millet, peas, and multi-species cover crops. So without further ado, take it away.
It's green. Okay, good. Hi. Hi, I'm Madeline Wilson. I'm the Ag Production System Specialist with CSU Extension in the Valley. At this juncture, my pedigree of very minimal education is not important because my job is to bring people who are doing amazing things in the Valley at the nexus of ag, water, soil health, together so that they can share their expertise. Oftentimes, the lived experience of multiple generations of knowledge can teach you more than a classroom can. So, with that, we're discussing soil health today. This is a water symposium, but we'll kind of touch on how soil health is very related to water conservation, increased soil moisture retention, and then also the more profitability or greater yield of your crops, which might in fact reduce the amount of inputs needed if the market can value that. So, to start off, I was hoping to ask our 2 folks here what soil health meant to them and why it might be a priority in their work or on their farm.
I'll get started if you don't mind. Go for it. How many of y'all are producers in the room? Excellent. Who's growing livestock? And everybody else growing crops? Who's got potatoes? Hey, how about trees? Yeah, a couple trees. All right, cool. Just helps me understand a little. So I'm going to give a little bit to kind of go with Madeline's question here. Does everybody know the soil health principles? How many are there? 6. I always ask this question. Everybody always says 5 because they've hammered it into us. That's 5. Context is the most important principle. You guys live in one of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet, honestly, when you drive across this valley. And so I can't talk to any producer in this valley and say the same thing to the producer 6 miles down the road because their soil's different, their climate situation is different, their crop rotation's different, how they manage this is different. And so I just wanted to bring up the fact that this is probably the most important aspect of all of this. If we don't know where we're at, what we're dealing with, how much water we have, what our soil type is like, what our soil texture is like, all those pieces, we can't do any of this. So to me, the most important thing is understanding the context and to work with you guys to ask you the right questions so that I can help you because I'm like Madeline, I'm a conduit to information. I'm not telling you what to do or how to do it, I'm trying to help understand what you're doing so we can find ways to help you be a little more efficient in your operation. So I'll just kick it off with that to start off that question.
Yeah, I think the context is huge on that, and I guess we can probably ramble about that in a few of the other bullet points, I guess. But as far as what does soil health mean, I think it is difficult right now when we have these things pop up that go from really intentional things at a conference that are supposed to build all these things, and all of a sudden you need to define it. And when you define it, things get out of hand quickly, I guess. So I think, in a way, soil health is something that all farmers deal with, whether you want to call it soil health or not. But it's just kind of the sum of the attributes of your farm and its capabilities to produce is how I would define it. And for our farm, it is the cornerstone of everything we do. And that isn't unique, but we tend to perhaps market it more than others. But in 2005, my dad took our farm organic, and that is kind of, you can't gloss over that. When I was a kid, organic farming was this thing that was reserved for other people. I mean, Bill Clinton bumper sticker people, and I was meant to really fear these people, right? So so that was a big deal when we switched to that. And when you make that switch, my dad likes to put it in 3 buckets when you switch to organic. There's organic by neglect, where you just get what you get. Thanks for the laugh on that one. There's conventional organic, where you are organic, but you're still farming under the same mindset with approved organic things, but you're still using the same strategies. And the third bucket is the aspirational one, where we try to be, is where you're kind of moving beyond organics, where you're using biological things to kind of close that gap between old NPK agriculture and this new regenerative soil health type movement. So we really, really strive to be in that third bucket, and there's no way you get there without a real soil health focus. And to get there includes markets, it includes conservation, and there's a whole litany of things that I could throw into that. But just at the summary, that's kind of where soil health fits into our farm and the greater strategy we have.
Thank you for that. So looking at some of these soil health principles, how do you assess the health of your soil and then decide which of these kind of principles take priority to treat what is needed on the ground?
So for this, I'm gonna kind of lean heavily on one of our new certifications. So it said we were the first farm in Colorado to be certified regenerative organic. And it has a heavy emphasis on, as the kids like to say, getting the receipts. And there's annual testing plans, that's soil, that's the actual stuff you produce. It also encompasses your employees, and it wants to make sure that your farm is in fact regenerating, and regenerating meaning improving in some way, shape, or form. So we do in-season tissue tests, we do the soil samples, we're currently working with Chico State through one of our vendors, Amy's Organics, to try to show that the produce that we're producing is nutrient dense. I think that's another term that gets thrown around a lot. But yeah, we are neck deep in all the testing and long-term monitoring. I mean, there's not an expectation that we pull this off overnight, but there is an expectation that, yeah, if we're going to be putting these labels on them, we want them to be meaningful, and we want to be able to prove that we are producing a better product and in a way that is sustainable for our soil, sustainable for our farms, and economically sustainable for us as a family business.
Awesome, thanks. So for the program, the Colorado Soil Health Program, we help producers with exactly the things that these guys are doing. So our job is to help with the technical assistance. So if they have different ideas, is to bring in those soil analyses. We work with CSU Spur Lab to do these analyses. We've got tests with those guys that we've sent to them a couple months ago. Very in-depth, standard chemistry, physical, and then biological samples. Additionally, we're pulling the RNA of the microbiology. That's a test that takes about a year to get the results on. It's so in-depth and costs a lot of money, but it's something as part of our program. So it's another tool we have to help assess soil health. And then I'm going to touch on this a little bit more in a minute, but how many people have soil moisture monitoring systems on their ground? I know a bunch of you in our program do, but I think it's probably, whether you use your shovel or your hands or an actual device, it's probably one of the number one things that we should be doing on the farm to help us make that connection between what we're doing for irrigating, what the plant is doing for response and production, what our nutrient cycling is, and then how we can manage that ground. So we all know we need to grow more with less, and water's probably the number one thing. How many of y'all are getting curtailed already this season? Maybe? I'm guessing I'll ask that question in another month or two and it'll be a different answer. But regardless, it's really important for us to understand. So these are some of the tools that we use, and just a quick touch on them, that we use to help producers understand what those are. And before we move on to the next question, this is what the soil moisture monitor system looks like. These are us installing these in different systems here in the valley. This is down in Blanca, installing it on a barley field over there. We have a sensor with temperature at 6 inches and a standard moisture sensor at 12 inches. And you can do them however you want, but that's what we do for the program. And we have 500 of these across the state. And then this is a livestock operation here. And so we'll put them in a cage so the cattle can't get to them. I'm not saying they won't get to them because they and the elk and everybody else gets to them, but our job is to go and make sure those are good. And I can pull up any of these on my app on my phone and see where you're at. If you call me and say, hey, I got something going on and I'm trying to figure out, I'll pop it up and we'll be able to talk through it together. I can do it right from my office. So you can do this. You can pull yours up on your app. You guys can look at them on your field. So the technology is really neat to be able to utilize that as part of our overall opportunity to measure soil health.
So for some of the folks in the room who might not be so familiar, this is kind of a tag-along question, but specifically, how does soil health increase your water holding capacity? What does that mean?
I think that there are, it is working, all right. So I think that's, again, a fairly difficult or loaded question as far as the way it works in irrigated, sandy, Hooper Jones or Hooper potato production. But it is, when you take just a simple test like of just water percolation is just one example. We did this last summer on one of the NRCS or Moscow Hooper soil conservation tours where on one side I had a field that had just been tilled and I had planted a cover crop in next to a field that had been in a no-till rotation it was going on its second year of no-till. And we did just the basic percolation test. And the one that had just been tilled, it was minutes. I mean, and you would think, and I have sandy soils, I mean, you would think that it would just go straight through there. But our water percolation test is you put a canister, you hammer it into the soil, you pour water on top, and you say when the water's gone. On the no-till thing, it was seconds. I mean, just the basic, right next to each other, feet apart, and that matters. I mean, any little rainstorm matters, right? And it's, on the one side, weeks before that, we had a normal 2/10 rainstorm, standing water on that cover crop side. On the no-till side, absolutely nothing. So I think, and that's just roots, that's structure, that's biology, that's all of that, just contributing to that kind of sponge holding the water. And I think to say that I have a specific objective measurement where I have changed my irrigation procedures for that, I can't necessarily say that, but I think it will show on a moisture sensor where simply you're going to lose less water as far as evaporation and things like that. So I think some of the dry land guys have better data than I will as far as to answer that question. But for me, it's obvious it's happening, but I don't have a great practical measurement of that.
So what are the big things that contribute to holding moisture in soil? Give me something. Organic matter, I heard from a bunch of people. What else? What is it? Particle size analysis, right? So what the makeup of our soil is helps us understand what our wilting point and field capacity of that soil is. Very good. What else? Ground cover. Excellent. What else? Residue. That's another, keeping that soil armor in place, right? Okay. I'm not going to tell you who this producer is, but that's Toby. He's our field specialist sitting with a producer on the left side. You think that soil is good and moist or nice and dry? Who thinks it's good and moist? Who thinks it's nice and dry? Okay. Unfortunately, it's nice and dry. We put the moisture monitors in there, and they were rock bottom down to the lowest level we could measure. And And this is in a place that is very, very tough with water. They only get about 12 inches of irrigation in this particular place. And so we went over to the alfalfa side of the pivot. Do you think it was dry? Do you think it was wet? It was really wet. So we had pinned down at about 1% moisture on this field, and the other field was at like 25% moisture. No difference in management or anything. So that covered, that living root, that higher organic matter. The organic matter percent for here was like 0.7%, and the organic matter on the alfalfa side was up like 3.2%, 3 point something, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the exact number, but over 3%. And so that holds that moisture, right? And the wind effect does not bother that covered ground. I should have had that picture in there. Why I have this other picture, this is a pasture-raised pork situation. Do you think that soil is dry or wet? Who says it's dry? Who says it's wet? It's really wet. That's a pasture, and he's doing a bunch of work to reestablish that, and everybody's like, oh, the pigs are so hard on it. Sure, they're pretty hard on it, but if you take them off at the right time and we practice rotational grazing, this pasture was growing knee-high in about a month after that picture was taken. And so intensive management is really important. And so all these pieces, all the principles, all those 5 principle plus contexts make up this and give us more moisture in that soil. So long answer short, but I'm trying to give you guys some pictures about how this thing all works so that we can connect those dots about what the producers are seeing on the ground and how we can then go through what they have going on in their operation and their management and their implementation to help them have the information they need to make good decisions to execute their next steps. So.
Thank you. So we talked a little bit about the different facets of the soil, right? We talked about the physical, the chemical, the biological. So I was hoping that y'all could share maybe some specific tools or strategies you do to ensure optimal soil chemistry, and then we can follow that up with some soil biology tools and strategies as well.
So the soil chemistry is one that I think we've changed a lot. As far as when I was a kid, it was we took the soil sample, Leroy would analyze us and tell us how much NPK to put on, and we would grow crops. And we've kind of moved away from the focus on the chemistry to the focus on the biologic part. And that part is done, the strategy for that for my personal operation is I'm trying to work on a 6-year rotation with minimal tillage in between the potato operations. And the potatoes pay all the bills on our farm, and potatoes are notoriously hard on soil. It's really difficult to put a potato in the ground or take it out without completely disrupting that soil biome. I would say impossible. I won't say impossible because someone will do it, but it's very tough. So kind of my whole thing, my dad loves an Elaine Ingham quote that's, you do what you got to do and remediate. So I try to have 5 years of remediation after potatoes, and to do that, I have a 5-year, hopefully it's a strategic rotation plan where I'm planting crops, I'm not tilling, and these crops all have a purpose and they all have a market. And I think that part is just essential for our farm to work. We just can't take years off as far as just planting crops for crop's sake. We really have to get some monetization of those crops. If you're going to put time, effort, diesel, and water into something, it's really nice to get a check at the end. And so the whole focus of that rotation is trying to build up that biology to get to our potato rounds and then hopefully not have too much of a reset and start over. So I've only been home on the farm 7 years. This will be my 8th crop, I believe. So I just started my 6-year rotation. So farming is super humbling coming from the biotech lab world where we had just this, I don't know, just the luxury of quick experiments, and the experiments just come slow, and they're on my dime now, so they're a little more expensive than they were before. But that's kind of our overall strategy, and I can't tell you that I have a perfect plan and that it's all mapped out, but that's the trajectory I'm on.
That's really great. And I think what we look at, so if you're sick, do you take the whole medicine cabinet and eat it all? You take the specific medicine for the specific disease or specific sickness you have, right? I think the same thing we're looking at soil chemistry is the same way. If we take those soil tests and we just dump whatever on the ground, which not everybody does that anymore, but if we just dump whatever out there, we're really hurting that biology, and that's the thing that we really need to focus on. And so it's really important to understand what's our crop yield goal, what's our soil have, and what do we need to put on that ground so that we can fertilize adequately. There isn't a producer I work with that I tell them they don't have to fertilize, whether it's synthetic, organic, manure, whatever it is. If you have a yield goal, has anybody ever met their yield goals without fertilizing in this room? I've never seen anybody do it. So if you can meet yield goals without putting something on or bringing cattle on, that's awesome, and I'd love to talk to you. But the reality is, you got to make a living, and you have to support that crop that's going to keep your farm in operation. So what do you need to do? And I think prescriptive application of the nutrients is really important. Additionally, there are so many products that are biologically driven, that are that come from the plant roots, right? Like our rotation he was talking about. If we can come in with a legume at some point, potentially in our rotation, to help bolster that, it could be an annual. If we can come in with a grain crop that does something to benefit the biology, that can be utilized. And then we can count those credits as part of our nutrient management plan, right? So the chemistry is really important, and the only way to be really good at that is to take soil samples pretty frequently. You mentioned foliar samples, right? That's another really key thing, because there can be deficiencies in that crop that we can't pick up in the soil for a lot of reasons. How many people have high salinity on their place? Man, this is awesome. It's like not even near as many. Usually if I'm talking in the Grand Valley or something, everybody's hand goes up and they start hemming and hawing because we have a lot of salt up there. Or over in Mancos or some of these other places. So salt will clog up the uptake pathways for certain nutrients on our plants. And so really understanding what that looks like, what our water has also. Do you do any samples on your irrigation water? It's really important so you know what the pH is, you know what is being carried in that irrigation water. And again, that's all part of doing the math. And we can sit down anytime and do that math to help you guys figure out that chemistry. So I would say take a lot of samples and really just pay attention to making sure you're putting the right amount of nutrients, maybe even split applications or whatever works on your operation, so that you can put the right amount in there.
So kind of zooming out a little bit, how does benefiting or improving the soil health benefit the environment or the public? I know we can literally see it in the sky some days here in the valley, but wondering if y'all could speak to that a little bit.
I think this is the perfect time of year for it, but Heather Dutton, my wife Sarah, they've started this rye resurgence project, and part of that is based on exactly what you're talking about. So the first stitch in my crop rotation after I've just decimated my wife didn't like me saying that word, after I had reduced my soil health after potatoes, the first stitch in rehabbing that soil is a fall planted rye crop, and it immediately stabilizes it, and it's one of those. It just has all these tangible benefits where simply, if any of you go driving around potato country in the valley in the next few weeks, there's going to be a brownout day, and there's all of a sudden there's going to be a patch where you can see, and you're going to look to your, depending which way, your right or your left, and you're going to see a green field of rye. And that is just one of those benefits that simply everybody gets to benefit from less dust blowing. And it's still one of those things where there's a whole conversation around climate change, we're going to have to eat different stuff, how are we going to do this? And this rye project is focusing on marketing rye. So there's a bunch of preconceived notions about what rye tastes like, and it's more or less all wrong. Rye is very neutral and delicious, but farmers can't sell rye. So you have to tell a farmer to put time, effort, and money and seed cost into these crops, and they're not necessarily going to get that sold. So it's one of those trying to convince consumers that they can help us with some of these biological approaches, and it does really benefit our whole community when we can have less dirt blowing around in the spring. So that's just one example that I think has some real tangible offshoots that are, it's also just kind of fun. You get to go to pizza places and visit these people experimenting with rye. You get to go to distilleries and breweries, and these are fun, enthusiastic entrepreneurs who are helping us kind of get this product out there. But it is a fairly straightforward crop to plant in the fall and to see a real tangible benefit from. So
I'll add one to that mix. So we talked a lot about soil erosion, but we can also talk about what moves across your field. Water. What does water bring with it? Nutrients. And what does the soil do? What does the soil and high in organic matter do with those nutrients? What's that? It holds them, right? It holds that, acts like a sponge. If you have high organic matter, you're basically holding those nutrients in all those pore spaces. And earlier we talked about the structure. I think you mentioned structure at some point. That structure of that soil, I wish I had brought a sample with me today. That structure of that soil has these micropores in it that hold those nutrients. And so if we have the soil with lots of structure and we have a high organic matter, we can hold those nutrients in our ground and be able to release it to the plant when it's time available for it. I wanted to show this one. Here's a good example up in this upper corner up here. Those are chicken tractors. This producer, that's out of Hotchkiss, so sorry it's not here. That cover crop one is here in the valley. But that particular one, these guys are raising 5,000 birds a year. They're meat birds. And what they do is pasture graze them. And so those little things move I think it's once a day, they move those little chicken tractors to the next spot and the next spot. And you can see where they had just grazed on. And so this producer why I wanted to use this example is this producer is right above a small reservoir. And historically, they put a lot of fertilizer on this, and it's flood irrigation, and that holding pond down below, that little reservoir, always had really high nitrate levels. And it was causing a lot of problems with the community, and they weren't able to swim on it. It's a little recreation area too. And so when this guy started doing this stuff, he now uses the chicken manure and a really little bit of some other things to make sure those pastures are growing right. But now, because they're basically not employing any more synthetic fertilizers and just using the chicken manure and then they drag the field right behind them, there's doesn't seem to be much more in the way of nitrate accumulations in that reservoir anymore. And so that's a big benefit for this community here, because now the kids can go jump in and maybe they got a little chicken manure on them, but whatever, they're kids, they can wash it off, right? But in the big picture, these little things that we're doing to help keep our nutrients on a place also makes that guy more money, right? Because now he's growing some more grass that can then be eaten by the birds, can then be produced by the meat, right? So that whole cycle's in place. And I could probably list off a half a dozen other one of these of folks who are reducing their tillage, so the structure's there that can hold those nutrients, and increasing their organic matter so they have that piece of sponge. So I know Robert's seen some of these things on his farm over time by reducing tillage on his place with the vegetables, but also there's a balance. Everybody's like, you can't just stop tillage, right, Robert? You also have to be able to manage the weeds and manage the crop, right? So I think it's really important that we think about how do we put it into our operation. What I'm telling you is a story from a producer. I'm giving you examples. These are things you can put in your head to say, how can I do that on my ground? Well, it's not going to look the same maybe, but that's okay. What works for you guys is fine. So, yeah.
I want to comment on these chickens. I mean, the pasture-raised chicken is one that you can have the most white toast person that doesn't care about food at all. You can feed them one of these chickens, any sort of farm-raised chicken, and they'll say, I've never had a chicken like this. So you're talking about how does this benefit the community? That is a better product than the $4.99 rotisserie chicken at Safeway, right? And we all buy those, they're fine. But the reality is that is a community benefit to have such a better product that's going to come off of here. And part of a lot of the ag problems are simply based on convenience and price, and what has suffered on that is a lot of times just quality and just the overall culinary experience of the food we get to eat. And we've done a few different rounds of chickens, and you wouldn't believe just the absolute, just overwhelmingly positive reviews that just normal pasture-raised chickens can get. So it's tough to understate just that value, is just the 5,000 just awesome meals that also created for that community. So
one last, make a really good point. And actually, how many people here are grass finishing their beef? Do you get rave reviews on your grass finished beef compared to your grain finished beef? Or you can say, yeah. How about you, sir? Pork too, yeah, exactly. So that was going to be my next question. Who's grass finishing any pork? It's a lot less common, but you are obviously, and people love it, right? Who bought your pork? The first time I ate a pasture-raised pork, I didn't think much of it, and I could not believe the quality of that animal, of that meat on my plate at the end of that. It was awesome. So I think this just really exemplifies all that, and I really appreciate you bringing that part up. So
So let's talk a little bit about the dollars part of this then. So since it's kind of coming up, I mean, obviously there's, we kind of talked about the environmental benefits of good soil health practices. It also saves our taxpayers some dollars if we're not, having the big dust storms that impact our health systems and accidents on the highway, and then all of the infrastructure. We have county commissioners in the room that is necessary to re-maintain our roads and things like that. But let's talk about the cost of these production practices, and then also maybe how the market is starting to shift to value those production practices.
That is essential to talk about any of these. I mean, I feel, and it's important to look at anybody, all of the big headliners at any of the big conferences, the Joel Salatins, the Gabe Browns, all those guys have changed the way they market and sell their products. And our farm is no different. My lovely wife, Sarah, here is the director of sales and marketing. And she's from San Diego. She's not from ag, but she just kind of took an interest in food and just simply, it started with just asking simple questions. My dad had some purple potatoes one year. We were still living in Denver and we needed to sell them. And we just started asking questions like, well, who buys them? Like, where do they go? Like, and just simply not being able to really easily tie those dots to simply being able to get these potatoes out there. So changing the way we market and changing the way we just value what we're selling. And our whole farm is based on specialty markets. We sell as direct as we can. And it's also, we just ask for a higher value. I mean, and some of this is, had my dad and I gone into that meeting, the first one we had with Whole Foods, there's no possible way that we would have got the number that Sarah got because she asked for it. And it's not like we're doing this to be greedy. This is the value of producing things in a different way. And it seems a little bit counterintuitive that we've been asking all of our farmers to just grow, but maintain these family businesses and make them desirable for your kids to move home to. And it's just really hard to do that when the whole growth model. All of our neighbors who have moved home, they've had to expand their farms and expand the acreage to kind of include another generation. Whereas we've tried to grow the business and shrink the farm and do that while adding another generation to the farm. So that has been difficult, but you can accomplish that without getting more money for your product. And it's tough. It's hard to do that, to just say, yeah, my potato is worth more than that soulless brown one the neighbor produced. I mean, that's tough to say. But at the end of the day, that is a marketing approach that we do take and that we believe, right? I mean, we have similar experiences with those pasture-raised chickens with our little unique specialty potatoes that are all different colors, sizes, and shapes. And it blows people's minds. They've never had potatoes like that. So I think that you can't understate the marketing part of this. And if someone's, I want to do soil health, I want to do all this, like, make sure you can afford it. Like, make sure you have a sharp pencil and a spreadsheet that can justify making some of these changes. And I think you can't stress the financial part of this enough.
So I'm going to take a little different perspective because not everybody has an awesome wife who's a marketing guru. But there's a couple different things that we can look at. One of them is a value-added product. Do you guys know Dave down in the south end of the valley? See, some people do. So they're making, does anybody know what this is over here? What is it? Yeah, it's a Johnson Sioux style, a little bit kind of growing on. So it's a fungal dominated compost. So wood chips are the #1 ingredient in this. And you see those holes right there? Those holes go 4 feet down all the way to the bottom of that pile. And then they irrigate, those are irrigation lines running on that, and it's under a hoop house. In about a year, this grows a very fungally dominated compost, and then they put it through an extraction machine and make a tea out of it. I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. We're doing lots of testing and sampling to see if we can understand what kind of mycorrhizae is actually being put on the field. And he only sells this stuff within like a small radius of his place because we recognize how important those local mycorrhizae and fungus spores are to the community. If we were to take this and ship it up to Rio Blanco County, probably wouldn't have any value, but these guys are finding some value. So this is us at a little field tour doing this last year, looking at this. It's a value-added product for them, right? So they found a different way to try and make some money off of their residues. They put their See all the hay bales back there? Those are straw. So instead of selling the straw off the farm, they keep the straw on the farm and incorporate it into this. They bring wood chips in. They make compost. They put this pile after they get the fungus out of it, and they put it back into composting, and then they'll get it back applied to field. So he's looking at different revenue streams, right? Thinking outside the box a little bit. We're working on some forestry projects. We're trying to do the same thing, where we go in and do, juniper cutting or oak brush cuttings or something like that. That's a really low value, but we got to figure out what to do with the fuel. And we have some people. We're hoping this summer we're going to start this project up in up kind of where I live near Grand Junction. So it's another one. The other thing I really want to hit on. There's two more pieces I want to hit on with this. One of them I have a slide for, and one of them don't. This is here in the valley. This is a cover crop. Multi-species cover crop mix. So this producer had never grazed cattle on the circle before. They did their cash crop, they took it off, they left that field fallow, open dirt, and then they planted their next cash crop. Last year, this producer decided when they got their cash crop off, they were going to put in this multi-species mix and bring the cattle on. I didn't get the numbers, but he said this far exceeded his expectations. At some point, I'll catch up with him and understand what his pounds per acre and how many cows for how many days and all that. I might have gotten that data from him, but I've been really busy, so I haven't seen it yet. But my guess is that there's easily a few thousand pounds an acre out there to graze on, and that cattle is going to gain really well on this kind of mix. It's not going to cause them any bloat or anything like that, but it's going to put good nutrients in their system, and they're going to be really happy on this ground. So this guy's really trying to keep the cattle off of hay all winter, and so this was his first kind of dive into it. And when I talked to him really briefly via text, he said, I am going to go full bore on this thing. The about $20 an acre seed or $18 an acre seed was much cheaper, and he far exceeded that income stream by grazing those cattle on there for longer. Less diesel fuel input for hay, right? You didn't have to hay it, you just set them out there. And granted, we had a decent winter with open ground, but those cows will get through that snow, right? So this is a pretty cool idea, and I think we are seeing, I got a guy up my way who I've been working with for a long time, and he's basically triple cropping. He runs a spring cover crop, his cash crop, and then a fall cover crop. And they graze on those cover crops nonstop. So he's optimizing that piece of ground to do the right, and has figured out the right cover crop mixes to help him gain on his cattle. They are not feeding at all. He's been doing this about 7 years. They feed zero hay on their farm, and they run 250 head in pairs. So it's pretty impressive to see what you can do if you think outside the box a little. So that's basically revenue in their pocket, right? Less diesel fuel. You know how much it costs to put hay up. It's really cheap to do this and graze on it. So the last one I want to talk about, who here sells barley? Anybody? Okay. Who here sells wheat? Wheat. You're not going to get a different price for your wheat because you called soil health, right? You don't negotiate the price of your wheat, do you? Well, maybe you
Sarah
do.
can say she can.
How about you over here? No, you sell your wheat to a broker, they buy it, they come and get it, they tell you how much they're paying you, right? So I can't help you on that side. What I can help you on is your input side. If we can dial down, maybe we can reduce a few pounds of N. Maybe we can reduce a pass. Maybe we can help keep more stubble out there so you have less irrigation pressures. You're not pumping water. There's a lot of different things, and so we are really, really looking hard. I have a lot of producers that do exactly what this gentleman's doing, and they sell it to a broker, and this is what the price they get. Cattle's the same thing, right? So my focus is on the input side. Last year, one particular producer, his input costs were down 8%. You're like, 8%, that's nothing. Think about what 8% means over a generation, right? He's going to take that 8% and I put money on it. He's going to double it, or at least put 1.5 times more in trying to do some other things and adjusting the way he's doing his operation. I have another producer we worked with. He's like, man, what can I do? I got a semi-trailer load of fertilizer out there. It's $45,000. I want to not do that anymore. So we've done all these things, and within 2 years, that $45,000 semi is not coming on his place anymore. I'm not telling you that we're going to be able to do this like that, but I think you guys can find ways to reduce your inputs, to improve your bottom dollar, even without changing the price you get for that product at the end of the day. So that's a big goal of ours, is really to try and do that. One last example I'll give you, and then I'll be quiet, is I got a guy who was doing grazing. He was haying 3 times and grazing 2 times on his pasture. This was up in the Grand Valley, so really intensive. And he was putting about 10 to 15, minimum $10,000 of overage on his irrigation every year. And so I said, Wayne, why don't we dial that back a little bit? Let's come down and do 3. So do 2 cuts and a graze, or 2 grazes and a cut. By the second year, he had alleviated any reduction in volume, right? Because we keep taking more and more and more, and that grass plant gets a little more stressed. So by the second year, he had achieved the same yield goal, but he put a lot less diesel fuel and had no more overage charges because those grasses weren't so stressed out in the middle of summer. So these are examples of ways we can think outside the box to reduce our input costs, even though your hay's the same, your grain's the same, or whatever on this end on the marketing side. Because unfortunately, unless you want to go around to all 500 farmers we work with, I don't think we're going to have that marketing opportunity. But those are just some other ideas on how do we keep ourselves in business. So
I think your comment on the value-added part is important, and I think farmers hear that and they think, oh, I don't want to build a cheese factory or something like that. But I think we've got a lot of value out of differentiating ourselves by just specific varieties, specific traits, and I don't necessarily, and some of it was luck. So there's a rye variety we've been growing for years. We started working with a craft distiller who's, again, the luck part is he is really talented. But this variety we happen to be growing, he has turned into this double gold medal award winning whiskey line. And he is absolutely killing it with now a variety of rye that we're marketing as that variety, and we get paid more for it. And it's back to the pricing on this. He's selling that bottle of whiskey for $120. And I mean, there's 20 pounds of grain in that bottle. I mean, like, he can afford to give me a few extra nickels. I mean, like, and he's happy to do it. Honestly, like, he gets and this is part of trying to pick your scale, right? I mean, I think there's no easy money out there, but there's farmers market land, and then there's big commodity land, and we're kind of trying to settle into one of those kind of middle ground spaces where you're kind of craft, where they're still using some volume, but they still need something unique, something to market themselves to. So the valley water situation in subdistrict number 1, there's no way to sugarcoat it. We're not going to mill it our way out of this. We have to rescale our ag, and there's no way to do that without some hardship and some friction, and trying to get more value out of what we're growing has been our strategy to kind of hit those metrics. So
Thank you. We talked a little bit about vertical integration. We talked a little bit about reducing your input costs. Before I open it up to questions here, I did want to say that Larry Brown with Extension, we did our ag business workshop recently, and we actually had some conventional guys come in who are still doing NPK, but they're adding some of these soil health practices on top. And some of these potato farmers were doubling the yields of their neighbors who were not adding those practices. Also, conventional barley guys just working with Proximity Malt, who now has a program that values regenerative no-till practices. They're getting a little bit more money than a conventional Ben-run barley would. The CDA also just rolled out a program where they're doing up to 75% tax credit on cover cropping. So there is ways that our state is recognizing the public benefit and the environmental benefit. There's ways that our market is starting to recognize it too. And I was hoping that now we could kind of open it up to questions just briefly here. I know we're kind of running low on time.
Yeah, we may have time for just at least one. I know they're hanging around. They can answer more questions for you. And if you're interested in some of the conversations about the Rye Resurgence Project and other things, we have Sarah and Heather here who can talk about that. But we have a question? One in the back.
Well, thank you for your thoughts. I wanted to make one observation about holding soil moisture in the root zone. There is a danger of concentrating both salt and increasing consumptive use. There is a value in salty soils to allowing water to penetrate back down to the aquifer for replenishment. You know, when you use drip systems, you concentrate a tremendous amount of salt and it becomes a problem. The other thing I want to comment on is that I think this has been a wealth of heartwarming testimonial evidence without any real hard evidence. Nothing about continuity, about how these programs work through a decade, say. I don't see any way that regenerative agriculture is actually measuring regeneration, because you just can't get something for nothing by doing more and more with less and less. You just can't do it. Farming is an extractive business, and I think organic got too vague. There were too many cheaters. We started talking about natural, ethically raised, all these other terms. People got confused, so we decided to put regenerative agriculture over the top of all of it to give the illusion that we're actually regenerating something. I'm not seeing a shred of evidence that you're actually doing
it. Yeah, I guess come visit Regan. Well, Michael, if you want to take
I would
that.
say that one of the
We can show it to you.
And I would say that one of the admirable parts of our regenerative certification is that they demand that I show that over the long period of time. There's a gentleman sitting right over here to your right whose brother can clearly show you principles of where he has increased his organic matter, where he has decreased inputs and things like that. So to say there's no shred, I applaud you for kind of keeping these organizations and stickers accountable and kind of keeping their feet to the fire, but I would say there is evidence, and you can, it depends what your bar is too. If you think we're going to get back to waist-high grass and buffalo roaming the San Luis Valley, I think we're probably not going to get there, but to say there's no shred of regeneration, I think is a little tough.
And I would just like to finish that off by thanking the farmers who are keeping track of this data, because for so long our institutes of higher education that have been kind of at the forefront of putting out these scientific papers have not been on the forefront of regenerative and organic. So thank you for keeping those soil records, for sharing that with us, and hopefully in this next decade I see some of the young farmers that spoke on this panel, that they will be able to attend classes in university that recommend these practices and train them on how to use them.
Thank you. Thank you very much.